Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the worn, fur-lined slippers of a medieval king. The torches are low, the castle's stone walls groan in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a dog is howling like it knows something you don't. You lying in bed, or what passes for one in the 13th century, and your royal day is about to begin. The problem? You're absolutely freezing. The chamber is vast, drafty, and smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and something suspiciously like onions. Your mattress is stuffed with straw, not feathers, and that lump under your back might be a mouse. You're sleeping under layers of woolen blankets, but somehow your nose still feels like it's developing icicles. Being king doesn't come with heated floors or private rooms. Nope. There's a servant asleep on the rush-covered floor near the hearth, a squire snoring not so quietly by the door, and 2 guards posted outside in full armor, complaining in hushed voices about how they miss their goats. So you lie there, blinking at the shadowy wooden beams above you, wondering for the 100th time why your crown isn't just a nice, metaphorical title that comes with warm socks and a pastry chef. You could be a peasant in a cozy hut right now, curled up by the fire with a chicken on your lap. But no, you're a king. There's a soft knock. Then the heavy door creaks open. In comes your chamberlain, bowing deeply and whispering something about sunrise, matins, and the bishop already waiting. Fantastic. You haven't even scratched your beard yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing our sleepy little kingdom stretch across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, your bare feet touching the icy stone floor with a wince. A servant rushes to lay out a rug, but it's too late. You've already aged 5 years from the chill. The morning air inside the castle smells faintly of smoke from last night's hearth, mingled with damp stone and centuries of old wood. Your breath fogs slightly in the dim light as another servant brings in a shallow bronze basin of lukewarm water. No soaps, just water, and a rag that looks like it's seen better decades. Washing your face is an exercise in bravery. You splash, gasp, and immediately wonder if royal dignity is supposed to involve this much shivering. Outside the narrow window, the sky is still pale blue. No sun yet, just cold clouds and the occasional raven circling lazily as if judging your every move. Even though you're a king, your room is shockingly basic. The medieval idea of luxury mostly involves tapestries to keep the wind out and maybe a bed canopy to catch the falling dust. You've got both, but somehow the cold still sneaks in like a thief. Historians still argue whether medieval kings actually had private chambers or just partitioned corners of a shared hall. You're in the lucky version, a semi-private room with a wooden screen, thin enough to hear the guards argue over whose wife bakes worse bread. Your first decision of the day? Whether to get up at all. But the bishop's waiting, the steward's pacing in the corridor, and someone's already warming your ceremonial boots. Even in this cold, you notice something worse. The silence. Because for a king, silence is rarely good. It usually means a courier's late, a rebellion's brewing, or someone has conveniently disappeared. You'll probably have to deal with that before breakfast. You sigh, stretch, and mutter something royal, but grumpy. Time to rule. The royal waking process is a weird blend of ceremony and awkwardness. You sit up, and a servant carefully lifts the edge of your wool blanket as if you are a sacred relic, revealing the king's nightshirt, linen, itchy, and way too drafty in all the wrong places. Another servant waits with a fur-lined robe that smells faintly of fox and cinnamon, not because it's scented, just because that's what the previous king liked. And here is the fringe tidbit of the morning. Some kings in this period supposedly believed sleeping too much weakened the soul. So, if you're tired, it's not just lazy, it's spiritually irresponsible. Excellent. The chamberlain presents you with a tiny gilded cross to kiss. Not for fun, of course. This is part of your daily sanctification. A little royal PR move to keep up your image as goddess chosen on earth. You kiss it dutifully, trying not to sneeze on the bishop's fingers. Meanwhile, someone's already emptied your chamber pot. Hopefully, you don't ask questions. That's what squires are for. And yes, someone somewhere is keeping track of whether your royal leavings look healthy. Medieval medicine wasn't subtle. In the distance, a bell tolls from the castle chapel. You shudder. That's your cue to begin yet another long day of pretending you know what going on. The candlelight flickers, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. You're fully awake now. Not because you're rested, but because being king doesn't leave room for dawdling. And even though you're technically the most powerful person in the land, you trade half your kingdom right now for a pair of wool socks and 10 more minutes under the covers. A deep, echoing yawn escapes before you can catch it. Unkingly, yes, but also entirely understandable given the circumstances. A half-dozen servants file in now, like sleepy ghosts in rough-spun livery, each one already deep into their daily routine. You sit on the edge of the bed, blinking at them as they begin what is, unfortunately for you, a very choreographed, very awkward ritual. The royal wake-up. First things first, the chamber pot. You're pretending it doesn't exist, but there it is, being discreetly removed by a red-faced page boy who's trying not to breathe through his nose. You'd think, being king, you'd get privacy for such matters. You'd be wrong. In the Middle Ages, privacy is a myth, and for royalty, bodily functions are part of the spectacle. Next comes the chaplain, gliding in like a particularly judgmental cloud. He carries a small book of morning prayers, a grim expression, and the faint scent of incense. You mumble the familiar Latin phrases while he watches your mouth to ensure you not skipping syllables. Even kings get spiritual report cards. The room's filling up now. In comes your personal groom, carrying your undergarments like they're holy relics. A valet follows, holding your hose. Yes, hose, as in long, tight woolen socks that take effort and teamwork to put on. You raise one leg stiffly and let them wrangle it like they're preparing a roast. Meanwhile, your royal barber approaches with a comb and a look of mild panic. He doesn't want to nick your face and lose his fingers, so he trims your beard with trembling care. Today, the style is slightly intimidating, but wise. Not easy to achieve when your hairline is aggressively medieval. Here is something fringe you won to find in most textbooks. There are records of kings insisting their morning breath be addressed before speaking to visiting nobles. One French king demanded a mint leaf placed under his tongue. You You're offered a cup of warm wine with a clove floating in it. It burns slightly, but helps mask whatever last night's venison did to your breath. A young page hovers nearby with a tray. On it, a kiss of morning symbolism, a small golden ring bearing your family crest. You slip it on your finger while the chaplain murmurs another blessing, one that includes a lengthy phrase about divine guidance and possibly not invading Flanders again. This is not a quick process. Getting up as a medieval king takes the better part of an hour and involves no less than 10 people doing very personal things while pretending it is all deeply dignified. The royal robes come next, starting with a linen undershirt and layering up through padded tunic, embroidered overgown, and finally, a fur-lined outer robe. Each layer is fastened by a different servant. It's like you're being wrapped for shipping. The belt alone requires 3 people and a small prayer that the clasp doesn't T-snap and hit someone in the eye again. Historians still argue whether the degree of involvement in royal dressing was about status or practicality. Some say it reinforced the king's sacred image. Others say it's because the average royal outfit was so complex, no single person could put it on without assistance. And don't even get us started on shoes. Your boots are pointed, leather, and lined with rabbit fur. They also take 5 minutes each to secure properly. You now resemble a combination of St. Nicholas and a slightly disgruntled turkey. You're weighed down in brocade, dripping in subtle symbols of power, and itching already. Now comes the part you've been dreading, the morning kiss, not the romantic kind. This is the political one. As you make your way out of the chamber and into the great corridor, various courtiers bow deeply. Some kneel. A few try to kiss your ring. One particularly enthusiastic baron leans in and kisses your cheek. You smile politely while mentally assigning him to a colder, more plague-prone region. The air out in the corridor is a bit warmer, thanks to the fireplaces roaring in the main hall. But the smell? A mix of old meat, wet dogs, and beeswax candles. It's the olfactory cocktail of royal power. Your steward appears, holding a long scroll, and wearing a look that says, "Please don't behead anyone before noon." He reads off today's schedule: a council meeting, a land dispute, a bishop's birthday feast, and possibly a falconry demonstration. If the birds aren't too moody, you grunt in acknowledgement and keep walking, boots clicking against the stone floor. Your entourage follows you like ducklings. The chaplain, the steward, 2 guards, a scribe, and a random noble, whose name you can never remember, but who insists on being present for security reasons. You finally reach the small audience chamber, where a velvet-covered chair awaits you. You sit, sigh, and brace yourself for the parade of morning grumblers. But before the doors open, there is one more moment of strange medieval routine. A servant arrives with a small wooden box. Inside is a tiny mirror. You're supposed to glance at your face, to remind yourself that you're both mortal and royal. The idea is that this moment of reflection grounds you spiritually before you start judging others. Instead, you catch sight of your bedhead, wince, and hand the mirror back without comment. You raise a hand, the doors open, the day officially begins. And yes, the first person in is already complaining about grain taxes. You're seated now, finally. But don't relax just yet. The royal dressing may be over, but the real costume continues. Every gesture, every sigh, Even the way your hand rests on the carved wooden lion is head of your throne-like chair is a performance. And today, your outfit is doing more of the talking than you are. This morning's ensemble includes a deep crimson tunic, heavy with gold thread embroidery, lined in sable fur, and studded with pearls along the hem. It weighs nearly as much as a small dog, and scratches exactly like one too, but it signals wealth, piety, and authority, all the things you need to remind your court about every minute of the day. And you're not the only one dressing for politics. Around you, courtiers have shown up in all their splashy best, bright blues, greens, imported silks if they can afford them, or if they borrowed from someone they hope to impress. The entire scene looks less like a sober ruling session and more like a medieval episode of Project Runway, Feudal Edition. There's a subtle game playing out as you scan the room. Who's wearing whose family crest? Who's reusing last year's surcoat? Who, accidentally, wore colors matching your own? It's all intentional. Dressing is politics, and politics is war, but with fancier hats. Historians still argue whether kings personally dictated the trends at court, or if fashion trickled upward from ambitious noblewomen. Either way, you're caught in the middle, trying not to look too opulent, or the clergy will start whispering, but not too plain, or the barons will think you're losing control. A servant brings over your ceremonial sword, its gilded hilt worn from decades of sweaty palms. You don't plan to use it, at least not today, but you rest your hand on it for effect, a reminder to the gathered nobles. You're not just here to adjudicate sheep theft. You're the apex predator in this stone and tapestry jungle. Now it's time to tackle the daily wardrobe-based trauma. Your crown, or at least the day crown, the smaller, lighter version of the full coronation monstrosity. This one is modest, just a circlet of gold with a single sapphire in the center. It still digs into your temples like a guilty conscience, but you endure it, as always, because it tells the world you're chosen by God, even if you haven't had a decent night's sleep since last harvest. One particularly fussy courtier leans in and quietly remarks that the color of your hose might be somewhat adventurous for a Wednesday. You smile, make a mental note. This is the same man who once tripped over a chicken at a feast. He'll be assigned to inspect grain silos in the north. During winter, your steward drones on beside you, listing off the food stores, military readiness, and the troubling disappearance of 2 minor lords in the borderlands. You nod gravely at all of it while mostly thinking about whether your new boots are giving you blisters. They are. Then comes a minor scandal. The Count of Velton showed up late, and shockingly underdressed. His tunic is plain, his cloak is dusty, and he appears to have ridden straight from his estate without changing. Gasps ripple through the chamber, subtle but unmistakable. He bows. You squint. He smells like horse and damp wool. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. In some medieval courts, underdressing before the king could be interpreted as a veiled insult, a statement that you're above ceremony, or worse, indifferent to royal authority. So, now the room watches you, breath held, waiting to see how you'll respond. Will you scold him? Joke? Have him publicly washed? You settle for a raised eyebrow and a slow sip of wine. He bows lower. Message received. After the small dramas settle, your scribe reads off a list of petitions from local lords. One is requesting land. One is accusing his neighbor of stealing his hunting falcons. Another wants permission to hold a private tournament, probably to show off his overachieving son who broke a knight's jaw last month. You respond with careful language. Each word is both judgment and performance. One wrong phrase, and you might trigger a feud that'll outlive you by a generation. Or worse, bore you senseless. There's also a quiet shuffle of parchment as your advisors bring up matters of war. Or rather, almost war. There's been a skirmish on the border, possibly the work of bandits, possibly an overeager young lord trying to impress you. It's always one or the other. You pretend to mull it over while staring at a tapestry. It's supposed to depict the Battle of Leofrun, but the proportions are all wrong, and the horses look more like sagging greyhounds. You vaguely recall commissioning it 3 winters ago, mostly because the castle walls looked too bare. One of the younger nobles offers a suggestion that borders on revolutionary. What if we sent emissaries instead of troops? He asks. Brave, naive, potentially useful. You give a slow nod and mentally categorize him as someone to watch, possibly reward, or possibly marry off to that baroness no one likes. In the corner, your falconer waits silently, holding a hooded bird on his wrist. You're not going hunting yet, but he's here just in case. You glance at the falcon. It stares back, unblinking. You suddenly feel like you're the one being weighed and measured. Outside, the sun is climbing higher, casting sharp shadows through the stained glass windows. It's still early, but you've been on stage for hours. You shift in your chair, adjusting the fur on your shoulders. It's time to leave the chamber and head toward the great hall. There's talk of food, though talk doesn't guarantee substance, and you're beginning to suspect your royal stomach has been plotting rebellion since sunrise. You glide, or rather, shuffle stiffly out of the council chamber and into the wide, drafty corridor leading to the great hall. Your robe snags momentarily on a nail sticking out of the wainscoting. You mutter something under your breath that sounds suspiciously unholy. A page boy notices, but wisely pretends he didn't hear. Smart lad. The hall smells like old meat, new rushes, and damp wool. There's also a lingering scent of beeswax polish and something faintly rancid. Possibly the butter. Possibly the baron who hasn't bathed since the feast of St. Agatha. Your stomach rumbles, loudly. The echoes off the stone walls make it sound like a small army in your gut has launched a siege. One of your guards glances over, eyebrows raised. You give him a look. He glances away. Good. You are hungry, but hunger in the 13th century is complicated. See, you might be king, but medieval breakfast is not what you, or any modern stomach, would call satisfying. In fact, for many in your position, the first meal of the day is skipped entirely. Breakfast is for children, the elderly, or the ill. Strong men, especially royal ones, are expected to wait until midday to eat. But, of course, there are exceptions. You're the exception, because being holy doesn't mean you have to be miserable before 9 a.m. You take a seat at the smaller dining table, set in the alcove near the hearth. This isn't the big feasting setup, just a modest royal snack station. A servant appears with a small silver plate. On it, a hunk of stale bread, 2 figs, and a cup of thin wine, watered down until it tastes like regret. You dip the bread out of habit. It's hard enough to chip a tooth and chew slowly, wondering if that squeak was a mouse or your molar giving up. There's a fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval kings had elaborate rituals even around these meager morning bites. One 14th century monarch insisted his bread be warmed over an open flame, blessed 3 times, and cut with a consecrated knife. You're just hoping it doesn't taste like charcoal and sadness. You take a sip of the wine and immediately regret it. It's not that it's bad, it's just aggressively honest. No spices, no honey, no effort. It's the kind of drink that makes you question your life choices, especially the one about not moving to Sicily. As you chew, your steward reads off messages from neighboring rulers. The King of Aragon has sent a falcon. The Duke of Aquitaine has sent another poem, longer than the last one, unfortunately. The Bishop of Wexford would like you to fund the rebuilding of his abbey, which mysteriously burned down during a rather rowdy Easter sermon. Historians still argue whether that fire was divine wrath or someone falling asleep with a candle and a belly full of mead. Across from you, a servant nervously presents a small plate of cheese. It's lumpy. You poke it with your knife. It doesn't fight back, which is a good sign. Still, you pass. You may be hungry, but not desperate. The steward clears his throat and reminds you that today, calendar, includes a visit from the Archbishop. You groan. The Archbishop is the human equivalent of cold porridge. Pious, slow-moving, and prone to discussing sin at great length over meals. Your gaze drifts to the high windows where morning light pours in, pale and milky. Dust motes float lazily, unbothered by royal concerns. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, then stops. You wonder if it found the kitchen scraps before the scullery boys did. Someone brings in a plate of soft-boiled eggs. You didn't ask for them, but they've arrived anyway. Possibly a peace offering from the cook, who's still recovering from the boiled pheasant incident. You try one. It's warm, comforting, and slightly over-salted. Still, it's better than the cheese. You lean back slightly in your chair. The hearth crackles. There's a momentary calm. This might be the quietest point of your day. And even then, half a dozen people are loitering nearby, just in case you need help chewing. Here's the mainstream historical fact of the hour. In many royal households, breakfast was considered almost a medicinal necessity, especially during long fasts. But even then, it was intentionally modest. Lavish morning meals were viewed with suspicion. Gluttony before prime prayers? Scandalous. So, your breakfast ends with a small handful of almonds and another gulp of regret-flavored wine. A monk walks in to murmur that morning prayers are about to begin again. Of course they are. The day is barely started, and already you feel like a heavily embroidered puppet. You stand. The fur-lined robe sways heavily. Your stomach is less growly now, but far from satisfied. Still, it will have to do. As you make your way toward the chapel, the nobles begin to arrive for court business. You nod at a few, ignore most. Your mind is stuck on the taste of figs and the awareness that there rests a roast boar being prepared for the midday feast. But you're not supposed to think about that yet. You're supposed to be holy, focused, regal, but mostly you're just cold, tired, and wondering if that lump in the bread was a fig stem or something far worse. Breakfast is over. Your duties are just beginning. You don't so much march as float toward the council chamber again, buoyed by layers of velvet, fur, and thinly disguised annoyance. The morning meal, such as it was, is already a fading memory, like warmth or freedom. Now it's time to meet with the Royal Council, which is equal part strategy session. theatrical performance, and babysitting for the over-entitled. The chamber doors creak open, and you re-greeted by the familiar cast of your morning melodrama. Nobles who've been up since dawn, sharpening their complaints. Clergy members eager to remind you you're mortal. And a smattering of knights who look like they'd rather be jousting than listening to arguments about sheep tithes. Your throne in here is more austere than the one in the Great Hall. No lions, no gilding, just a solid, heavy-backed chair with a carved cross above it. Subtle symbolism. God above, king below, everyone else somewhere between your boots and the rats. You take your seat and immediately wish the cushion weren't stuffed with what feels like gravel. Across the table, your chancellor begins to unroll a parchment the length of a coffin lid. It lists everything that's gone wrong in your kingdom this week. First item, a village in the northern reaches claims it was visited by a dragon. Yes, again. No, still probably a bear with mange. But the villagers demand compensation for 3 chickens and a slightly scorched goat shed. You nod slowly, then discreetly gesture for this matter to be handled without ever reaching your ears again. Then comes the real stuff. Tax collections have dropped in the eastern counties. The roads are muddy, and bandits are getting bolder. One lord apparently refuses to pay until he is recognized as Grand Duke of the Oaklands. You raise an eyebrow. The man lives in a swamp. Historians still argue whether these kinds of inflated titles meant much, or were just overcompensating for poor land management. And now, grain. There is always grain. Your steward begins discussing yield estimates, tithes, mill repairs, and the shipment that sank last week during a surprise storm. At this point, you begin mentally composing a haiku about getting lost in your own granary. You nod sagely while scratching your knee through 3 layers of linen and velvet. Then there's a new wrinkle. Someone has been secretly hoarding salt. Not gold, not arms, salt. You suppress a sigh. Salt is currency. Salt preserves food. Salt prevents you from dying a slow, smelly death from a rotten meat. But still, you're the king, not the salt sheriff. A bishop clears his throat and makes a vague statement about divine punishment for greed. Everyone murmurs agreement. You suspect half of them are also hoarding salt. Suddenly, a courier bursts into the chamber, panting and red-faced. He bows so quickly, he nearly falls forward. He delivers a wax-sealed message from your cousin in the south, claiming that unrest is stirring and requesting immediate reinforcement. This is how they always word it. Unrest means someone's been insulted. Reinforcement means they want your knights to clean it up. You ask one of your scribes to pen a carefully worded, non-committal reply and wonder if it's too early in the day to fake an urgent prayer session. Now comes the fringe tidbit of the day. During particularly long council sessions, some medieval kings reportedly kept pets at their side, dogs, monkeys, even falcons, to entertain themselves and subtly intimidate others. You just have a goblet of watered wine and a cold draft sneaking up your sleeves. A noble clears his throat to present a petition. He takes a full 3 minutes just to greet you. Then he describes in excruciating detail how a neighboring baron allowed his pigs to trespass onto ancestral potato fields. You stare at the man. You wonder if you could solve this with a coin toss and a sarcastic letter. Historians still debate whether medieval councils were truly effective governance bodies or elaborate rituals of status-preserving bureaucracy. As you sit here, listening to a lengthy debate about bridge tolls, you lean toward the latter. Then, something interesting. The Queen's Chamberlain arrives with a message. She requests your presence later in the day. No reason given, no urgency implied, which, of course, means something's either broken, leaking, or pregnant. Possibly all three. You nod at the Chamberlain and mentally adjust your schedule. The afternoon just got more complex. As the council drones on, you shift in your chair and glance at the stained glass windows. The light has shifted. It's nearly midday. You're halfway through the day, and only 10% through your patience. There's a growing hum in the room. Not noise, just weariness. Even your nobles are flagging. A few scribes are struggling to stay upright. One guard is discreetly dozing, with his eyes open. A skill developed in dozens of meetings, just like this. Finally, you raise your hand. The room falls silent. You announce that the session will pause for the midday meal. There's a subtle ripple of relief, but before you rise, you lean toward your chancellor and mutter a short list of names. People you want spoken to, questions you want quietly answered, land disputes you want buried under a fresh pile of vague paperwork. You may look tired, you may feel tired, but the crown doesn't sleep, even when you're dealing with chickens, dragons, and potato feuds. You stand, robes rustle, everyone bows. You leave the chamber slowly, gracefully, resisting the urge to sprint toward the smell of roast boar and fresh bread coming from the kitchen hall. Midday awaits, and with it, a brief return to the illusion of comfort. You stride, okay, more like glide stiffly, into the hall of judgment, and the noise immediately thickens around you. Petitioners, scribes, guards, gossips, and the occasional opportunist who thinks you in a generous mood just because you were wearing your less severe crown. You're not. You're just tired. The scent of wax, sweat, and too many people crammed into one echoing chamber greets you like an old, damp friend. The hall is long, shadowed, and dominated by a raised dais at the far end. That's where you sit when rendering justice, a symbolic step higher than everyone else, because apparently enlightenment increases with altitude. Today's docket, a glorious mixture of feuds, thefts, accidents, insults, and one chicken-related injury. Again, you ease into your wooden seat, the carved arms polished smooth by the anxious hands of kings past, and let out a soft sigh that no one acknowledges. First case, a farmer accuses his neighbor of stealing 2 pigs. The neighbor claims they wandered over during a storm. The pigs, being pigs, have no comment. You raise an eyebrow, sip your wine, and issue a ruling. The pigs are returned, the fence must be repaired, and both men are fined for wasting your time without offering snacks. That last part gets a laugh. You allow it. Then comes the jester. He doesn't really belong here, but he's shuffled in, juggling apples and grinning like someone who knows where all the skeletons are buried, including metaphorical and possibly actual ones. His performance today includes impressions of various court officials, a song about the bishop's unusually pointy hat, and a falsetto impression of your snore. You chuckle, just barely. A king must not laugh too freely, but a little smirk keeps the peasants loyal and the nobles on edge. Plus, you really do snore like a drowning owl. Historians still argue whether jesters had genuine influence in court politics or were just sanctioned chaos. In your case, this one once whispered a piece of gossip that saved your life during a dinner ambush. So yes, his jokes are terrible, but his survival instinct is excellent. Next petitioner, a merchant from the eastern city who is furious about a new toll on imported spices. He waves a spice pouch in the air for dramatic effect. The scent hits you like a memory. Clove, cinnamon, the faintest hint of pepper. You raise a hand to pause him, not because you disagree, but because now you're daydreaming about mulled wine. When he's finished ranting, you deliver your verdict with a straight face. The toll remains, but his next shipment gets one-time protection by royal guards. He bows deeply. You've just gained a favor and a better chance of having cinnamon for the winter. Win-win. Now, a soldier, old, scarred, trembling a little, kneels and asks for a land grant in return for years of service. You recognize him. He took a spear to the leg defending your father's retreat during the Battle of Wex Hollow. You don't hesitate. The land is his. The court goes silent for a moment. Even in this age of iron and parchment, loyalty still matters. Even if you don't show it often. Suddenly, a commotion at the chamber doors. 2 guards drag in a lanky teenager accused of insulting a baron's daughter. Insulting how? You ask. The boy blushes. A whispered rumor about her beard, apparently. You stifle a smile. The baron, on the other hand, is purple with rage and demands a lesson be taught, so you offer a creative sentence. The boy must serve in the castle kitchens for a month and compliment everyone he sees. Excessively, you declare him royal flatterer in training. The court chuckles. The baron fumes, but he nods. Case closed. Fringe tidbit. In some courts, punishments doubled as entertainment. There are records of prank sentences, singing apologies, public flattery, or forced poetry used in place of flogging. Keeps morale up and fewer bruises to explain to ambassadors. Then comes the foreign envoy, tall, poised, impossibly elegant, and so full of vague politeness that you're fairly sure he's either spying or trying to marry you to his cousin. He presents a gift, a painted scroll depicting scenes from his homeland. It's lovely. It's also probably coded. You accept it with the neutral expression of someone who knows art can also be war. He bows. You bow slightly less. It's a dance, this diplomacy. Less swordplay, more fan-fluttering and veiled insults. But you enjoy the performance, especially when it ends with the promise of elephants next spring. Probably metaphorical. You hope not. You stretch. The bench creaks. The candlelight shifts. You've been here hours, doling out justice, flattery, favors, and the occasional passive-aggressive lesson in humility. The court scribes look ready to faint. Historians say medieval justice was swift, public, and performative. And they're right. But it's also exhausting. You're not just solving disputes. You're sending messages, maintaining balance, performing control with every raised eyebrow and calculated pause. A clerk clears his throat and announces that's the last case. You nod, grateful. Then, just as you're about to rise, someone yells. It's a woman in rough wool, face flushed, eyes wild. She wasn't on the list, but she's pushed her way forward and now drops to her knees. Her voice echoes. Her village is starving. She begs for grain. Her husband's dead. Her son disappeared last winter. The room falls utterly silent. You meet her gaze. You gesture for the guards to let her stay. You ask her name. You send someone to speak with her privately. And you order 2 sacks of grain to be sent immediately, quietly, without ceremony. The nobles murmur. but they nod. Compassion is currency too. Sometimes it buys more than fear. You rise. The hall empties slowly. Justice has been served. For now, the jesters, thieves, lords, and ladies disperse like birds startled by thunder. And you head to the kitchens. You've earned lunch. Or, at the very least, the illusion of it. The hallways are thick with the smell of roasted meat. Your nose twitches involuntarily, despite years of royal training not to seem too enthusiastic about food. But your stomach is making its opinions very clear. It has waited patiently through tax debates, village scandals, and a pig custody hearing, and it is done being polite. Your boots tap steadily along the stone as you head toward the great hall for the main meal of the day, dinner, as it's called in the 13th century. What modern folks call lunch, what your stomach calls overdue. As you enter, the air is noticeably warmer. The hall's high, arching ceiling traps heat from the kitchen fires and braziers, while long wooden tables stretch out like rivers of opportunity. The servants are placing trenchers, thick slices of stale bread that double as plates, along the boards. The best ones are only a few days old. The worst could be used for roof tiles. A chorus of kitchen workers shuffles past you, balancing steaming pots, dripping birds, and platters stacked with mystery pies. You catch the scent of garlic, sage, and something uncomfortably like eel. Still, your mouth waters. You take your place at the raised table, the high table, at the far end of the hall. It's elevated on a dais and covered with a crisp linen cloth. You get a proper cup, a real plate, and a knife so fine it could double as a status symbol. Everyone else? They're lucky if they get both ends of a spoon. But before you can touch a single morsel, there's the prayer. The priest steps forward, hands raised, face solemn. He blesses the food, the feast, the kingdom, and probably your patience. You mumble along, and then, finally, the food begins to arrive. Today, fortune smiles. It's not a fast day. You get roast boar, glistening with fat, garnished with apples, a stuffed swan, feathers arranged to look majestic, if slightly miffed, bowls of stewed beans, fish cooked in almond milk, and those little spiced meatballs the Queen's cousin is always stealing off other people. S-plates. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval kings didn't eat alone. Meals were spectacles, public displays of wealth and power, and sometimes good manners, or their total absence. Servants bustle back and forth, pouring wine into your silver cup and offering sauces from delicate little pots. You try the mustard one. It clears your sinuses so violently you feel your ancestors blink. But not everyone's joining in the indulgence. A few seats down sits a particularly pious bishop, grimacing at the boar like it just cursed at him in Latin. It's Friday tomorrow, and he's already mentally preparing to fast. You toast him cheerfully and take another bite. A herald announces the name of each dish as it's served, which is helpful because some of them are suspiciously ambiguous. A pie of fish with fruit and spices sounds promising until you bite into it and realize the fruit is prunes and the fish is possibly yesterday's. Still, the crust is flaky. Fringe tidbit of the hour. There are records of entire animals being sewn back into their skins for dramatic presentation. Imagine a peacock roasted and redressed in its own feathers, beak open in a sort of edible opera pose. You saw that once. You haven't recovered. The court musicians strike up a soft melody, lute, harp, and a reedy pipe. One of the younger knights tries to sing along, but he's off key and only knows every third word. You ignore him. Then there's the queen. She sits beside you, elegant in her silk and circlet, nodding graciously as the bishop drones about the dangers of over-seasoned lentils. She leans over and mutters that your cousin is flirting with the ambassador's wife again. You glance across the hall. Yes, he's halfway through a sonnet and working his way through her soup as well. You smile faintly, sip your wine, and file that bit of intelligence away for later. Not everything at the meal is relaxation, though. There's maneuvering happening in every whispered word and sideways glance. A baron asks to host a hunt next week, code for, I want to show off my castle and discuss alliances without scribes listening. A visiting count praises your new hall tapestries, which really means I saw how much money you spent, and now I'm subtly reminding you I noticed. You nod, you chew, you sip, you rule, and then the dessert course arrives. It's a subtlety, not in flavor, in structure. A sculpted marzipan castle, complete with almond towers and a tiny sugar drawbridge. It's beautiful. You slice into it with the same ceremonial seriousness you used to cut a treaty last spring. Sweet almond paste floods the air. Everyone applauds politely. You get the best bite, of course. The ambassador next to you receives a crumbled corner and pretends to be delighted. Politics tastes like sugar and hidden tension. As the meal winds down, conversation shifts from food to philosophy, or at least noble attempts at it. A minor lord begins quoting Seneca, badly. The queen squeezes your hand under the table in warning. You nod. It's time to end on a high note. You lift your goblet and stand. Everyone hushes. You deliver a brief toast. Praise the feast. Praise the harvest. Praise the kitchens. You stop just short of praising the eel pie, because you're not a liar. Then you sit, and the meal officially ends. The servants begin to clear. The hall buzzes again with the energy of people digesting while trying to seem important. The queen leans over and says, You didn't even touch the pear compote. You grin. I was waiting to trade it for leverage. She rolls her eyes. You've been married long enough to know she's probably going to eat it herself. You push your chair back, stretch, and suppress a burp. Kings don't burp. Not in public. There's still a long day ahead. Hunting, diplomacy, maybe a poem or two. But for now, you're full. And that counts for something in a world where even royalty doesn't always know what the next meal will bring. You step out into the courtyard, blinking against the sunlight. It's late afternoon now, and the shadows have started stretching long across the cobblestones. Somewhere behind you, a dog barks. Somewhere ahead of you, a horse sneezes. Welcome to the royal hunt, or, as you like to think of it, the noblest excuse in the world to avoid paperwork. Your squires are already bustling about, adjusting stirrups, inspecting arrows, and trying not to panic over the falcon that just flew off before being properly leashed. You ignore it. If it comes back, it's loyal. If it doesn't, it's a metaphor. Today's hunt is more pageantry than actual blood sport. You're not particularly interested in chasing deer through the brambles, especially not after 3 courses and a marzipan castle. But appearances matter. A king who hunts is a king who's strong, virile, and in total control, even if he's secretly hoping for a gentle canter and a squirrel sighting. Your horse is brought forward, a tall and slightly moody gray stallion named Alder. You mount with as much grace as one can muster while wearing 3 layers of embroidered wool and a decorative sword that keeps poking your thigh. A small crowd of courtiers mounts behind you, all pretending this isn't their first time on a horse this month. And then you ride through the gates, out into the forested lands beyond the castle. The air is cleaner here, sharp with pine, damp earth, and the faintest whiff of distant dung. Birds call overhead. The trees sway gently, tall and indifferent. You ride in silence for a while, letting the rhythm settle your thoughts. This is your land. These are your woods. Every root, stone, and hedgehog theoretically bows to your authority. That squirrel darting up the oak? Your squirrel. You consider taxing it. The hunt begins in earnest when a pair of scouts signal that they've spotted a deer trail. The hounds, all floppy ears and boundless enthusiasm, are loosed with a flurry of barks. They sprint ahead, sniffing and baying. The younger knights spur their horses and give chase. You, of course, maintain a more measured pace. That's code for not breaking a sweat. Let the ambitious boys leap over logs and nearly fall off their saddles. You stay back, surrounded by your most trusted guards, and one very nervous falconer who keeps apologizing for losing sight of Harold the bird. Fringe tidbit: falconry wasn't just a sport, it was a status symbol. Entire treatises were written about which birds were appropriate for which classes. As king, you're entitled to a falcon. You currently have a very confused kestrel. Historians still argue whether kings really cared which bird was on their wrist, or if they just wanted something dramatic to perch during negotiations. Eventually, one of your nobles manages to flush a deer from the brush. There's a flurry of motion. Hounds barking, hooves pounding, arrows flying. It's chaos. And you? You draw your bow slowly. Take careful aim, and let the arrow fly. It sails neatly past the deer, into a tree, and lodges itself with a thunk. The deer escapes. You shrug. You could have hit it. You just didn't want to embarrass anyone. Probably. One of your men manages to land a clean shot, and the deer falls. Everyone cheers. The victor beams. You ride over slowly, dismount, and offer a congratulatory nod. The deer is inspected, declared clean and blessed, and the royal gamekeeper marks it for the kitchen. You kneel briefly, offer a murmured thanks to God for the bounty of the land, and wipe your hands with a cloth that smells like pine sap and rabbit. You're still not sure if that's intentional. You remount, but rather than turn back, you signal a detour. There's a stream nearby, quiet, shady, a good place to rest. You ride that way, and the others follow, grateful for the pause. You reach it in silence, and for a few moments, everything stops. The horses drink, the wind rustles. Somewhere overhead, Harold the falcon reappears, circles once, and lands on the falconer's arm with all the drama of a returning diva. The falconer nearly weeps. You dismount again, crouch by the stream, and let the cool water run over your fingers. It's here, in moments like this, that the crown feels the least heavy. Not gone, but quiet. Your guards stand back. The forest hums with life, and you just breathe, for the first time since dawn. And then, of course, the spell breaks. A courier on horseback comes crashing through the underbrush, waving a scroll and apologizing before he even dismounts. You sigh. You know that look. Something political has happened, or someone fell, or both. You take the scroll, break the seal, skim the lines, A neighboring noble has accused one of your border knights of trespassing. Again, they've written with grave concern and expect swift justice. You fold the scroll, tuck it into your sleeve, and remount. Back to the castle then, back to diplomacy and veiled threats. But at least you had a stream, a moment, and a falcon named Harold, who made a surprisingly triumphant return. You nudge Alder forward, the hooves squelching slightly on the mossy ground. The others fall in line behind you. No one says anything. They know better. Hunting is done. The next battle wears silk and carries scrolls. You ride home in the quiet dusk, the sun turning gold through the trees, and think, not for the first time, that kingship is mostly paperwork with better snacks. You return to the castle just as the sun dips behind the western tower, casting everything in long shadows and a golden, almost forgiving glow. The gates creak open, guards straighten, and the stable boys rush forward like it's their calling in life, to catch sweaty horses with aristocratic riders. You dismount with a practiced groan and pass Alder off to the nearest page, who salutes with far too much enthusiasm. As you cross the courtyard, someone clears their throat behind you. It's your steward. He's holding a bundle of scrolls, looking apologetic in the way people do when they're about to ruin your evening. The ambassadors are waiting in the solar, he says. You keep walking, and there's a bard. You stop, turn slowly. A bard? Yes, sire. He insists he was summoned. A pause. By Lady Ismene. Ah, Lady Ismene. Your cousin's wife. Obnoxiously poetic, delightfully bored, and always trying to make court culture a thing. You sigh. Guess it's time for diplomacy and lyrical torment. You head upstairs to the solar, a bright chamber softened with tapestries and scattered cushions. The fire crackles in the hearth, and the air smells faintly of lavender and recently snuffed candles. Several foreign envoys are already there, looking elegant and uncomfortable in equal measure. There's the envoy from the north, wrapped in furs, despite the warmth. The ambassador from the coastal duchy, her robes embroidered with tiny fish that shimmer when she moves. And in the corner, a painfully tall man playing a lute and humming softly to himself. The bard. You take your seat, a simple chair with lion heads carved into the arms. Not your throne, just something royal enough to remind people who pays the bills. Goblets are filled, pleasantries exchanged. The room settles like a cat on a sunlit windowsill. The ambassador from the north begins first, praising your hospitality in a tone that suggests he's about to ask for something expensive. Sure enough, within 3 sentences, he's dancing around the idea of mutual troop cooperation. You nod slowly, sip your wine, and smile the way a fox might smile at a particularly ambitious hen. Meanwhile, the bard begins to tune his lute more aggressively. You raise a hand, stopping him mid-pluck. Later, you say. He bows. The fish-embroidered ambassador smirks. Here is your mainstream historical fact for this scene. Diplomacy in the Middle Ages wasn't it just about treaties and borders. It was about feasts, performances, gifts, and carefully timed silences. In a world where letters took weeks to arrive, tone and body language were everything. A single toast could be a declaration of war, a poorly timed poem, a scandal. Speaking of poems, Lady Ismene glides in, draped in enough silk to dress 3 lesser nobles, and announces, "We are blessed tonight by the words of Edward of the Marshlands." The bard stands, bows, begins to strum. You resist the urge to leap from the window. The poem is about you, of course. They always are. It opens with a description of your lion-hearted gaze and ends with a metaphor involving moonlight, destiny, and a surprisingly graphic comparison to a falcon's beak. There is clapping. You make a sound that might be gratitude or indigestion. The envoy from the coast leans over. You must be flattered. I am many things, you reply. Flattered is one of them. She laughs, which is dangerous. Envoys who laugh are often about to extract trade agreements from you like candy from a distracted child. Indeed, she wastes no time pivoting to her proposal, expanded access to your port. In exchange, she offers a small fleet's worth of dried fish, and rather ominously, cultural exchange opportunities. You imagine a dozen more Edwards arriving next week. You shudder, and here's your fringe tidbit. Medieval kings were often gifted poets, musicians, even entire troops as diplomatic gestures. One particularly unlucky king received a singing camel. You've never gotten a camel. You live in hope. The room becomes a tangle of discussion, negotiation, backhanded compliments, and oversweetened wine. You accept some terms, delay others, and deftly sidestep a veiled insult involving your kingdom's drainage systems. You remind everyone you're the kind of king who once rode 3 days in armor to personally inspect a leaky bridge. This is only mostly true. Outside, twilight deepens. A servant lights more candles. The shadows dance. You turn back to the bard, who's begun a second song without permission. This one is shorter, thankfully. Something about your eyebrows being noble sentinels. You briefly consider exile, but Lady Ismene claps delightedly, and everyone else joins in. You smile through it like a man being politely strangled by silk. Historians still argue whether these bardic performances actually swayed royal decisions, or were simply endured out of custom and fear of looking uncultured. In your case, they mostly serve as mild torture, with a metered rhyme scheme. The night wears on. Agreements are formalized. Goblets drained. You promise to consider a marriage proposal between your youngest niece and someone as second cousin. The bard finally retires, humming to himself and eyeing the leftover pastries. You let him take one, maybe two. He earned it. Barely. The ambassadors bow. You bow less. It's not unkind, just calculated. You leave the room with your head high, your patience thin, and your ears still ringing from the phrase, eyelids like twin oak leaves. Another diplomatic victory. Another poem survived. You cross the hall, back toward your chambers, whispering to your steward, no more bards this week, or next, or possibly ever. The steward nods solemnly. Shall I cancel the puppet troupe tomorrow? You stop. Blink. There's a puppet troupe? He grins faintly. There was. You keep walking. You make your way through the corridor. Footsteps muffled by rushes scattered over cold stone. The halls are quieter now. Just the occasional shuffle of a servant or the distant clatter of a dropped goblet in the kitchens. You are re-headed to your private chambers, though private is a generous term in a castle where the walls have ears and possibly mold. The air is thick with the smells of the evening, candle wax, damp stone, and the faint sourness of boiled linens. You sigh, adjusting your belt as you walk. One of your rings has started to chafe, and there's a definite itch developing under your left shoulder plate. Royalty, as always, has its perks. By the time you reach your chamber, your valet is waiting with a basin of hot water. Not hot, more like lukewarm with ambition. He bows and gestures toward a padded bench near the hearth. This, dear listener, is as close as you get to personal hygiene. Let's be clear. Medieval kings did bathe, but not daily, and definitely not with the modern idea of soaking in a tub full of scented bubbles. This is more of a damp sponge and muttered apologies situation. The valet gently dabs your face, neck, hands, and feet, while a second servant sprinkles dried herbs into the basin to cover the smell of your own exhaustion. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Bathing habits varied wildly from kingdom to kingdom. Some rulers bathed weekly, others monthly, and a few avoided it altogether under the belief that water weakened the body's defenses. A fun, if incorrect, assumption that made everyone slightly more fragrant than you'd like. You sigh as warm water hits the back of your neck. It feels like a blessing. Unfortunately, the towel that follows feels like a punishment. It's coarse enough to be repurposed as armor. Still, you endure. You're a king, not a delicate lordling from a wine-soaked province. Next comes the shirt change. Your day tunic, damp from riding and diplomacy, is peeled off and replaced with a lighter, softer robe embroidered with your crest. It feels slightly better, less like you're being hugged by a porcupine. But there's still the itch. You scratch absently behind your shoulder and glance sideways at your valet. He notices, hesitates, and then steps back with a knowing look. Milords across Europe suffer similar complaints this season, he says vaguely, as if nobles everywhere are comparing insect bites in secret. Here comes your fringe tidbit. Despite high status and luxury fabrics, medieval kings were absolutely not exempt from lice. In fact, some even kept fine-toothed combs near their thrones, and there are records of courtiers excusing themselves mid-conversation to do a bit of discreet scratching. Yes, even diplomacy gets itchy. You sit by the hearth for a moment while your steward updates you on minor household gossip. One of the kitchen boys tried to make off with a wheel of cheese. The steward found it, cleverly hidden under a cot. The boy has been sentenced to scullery duty for a week. You nod. Justice, indeed. Then there's the question of the Queen's evening plans. She's in the garden, Your Majesty, the steward says, with Lady Mirabelle and a small harp. You raise an eyebrow. The Queen only brings the harp when she's in a poetic or diplomatic mood. Either you're getting a romantic serenade or a strongly melodic complaint about something you forgot to approve. Possibly the candle budget again. You decide to give her space. You head toward your library instead. Well, library is a grand word. It's a chamber with 6 books, 4 of which are illuminated manuscripts you can barely open without gloves. But it's quiet, smells like leather, dust, and wisdom. And sometimes that's enough. You sit, stretch your legs, and open a volume of St. Augustine. After 3 pages, you realize you're reading the same paragraph over and over, which makes sense. You've had a long day. Even divine insights about grace and humility can outmatch a well-roasted boar, and 2 hours of veiled threats in diplomatic verse. The wind picks up outside, whistling through the arrow slits. Somewhere in the castle, someone drops a bucket. You consider calling it a night, but not quite yet. You call for the apothecary's assistant, a nervous, spotty young man with ink-stained fingers. He enters with a small wooden box and begins mixing your evening tonic. It's a murky green liquid, said to ease digestion, promote dreams, and align the humors. You're fairly certain it just makes you burp and sleep a little deeper. Still, You drink it. Historians still argue whether such tonics were genuinely medicinal or more about routine and ritual. Either way, this one tastes like boiled cabbage and regret. You nod your thanks and send the boy away. Finally, you return to your chamber and catch sight of yourself in the polished silver mirror. You look tired. Not bad exactly, just used. The way a good cloak looks after 10 winters. Still strong, just frayed at the edges. You run a hand through your hair, scratch once more at your shoulder, then shrug and prepare for the second strangest part of your daily routine, evening entertainment. Because no matter how itchy or exhausted you are, a medieval king must occasionally host the court in post-dinner frivolities. And tonight, you've been promised music and games, and if you're very unlucky, philosophy. The torches are lit, their flames crackling gently along the corridor walls, casting soft golden light that flickers across stone, tapestry, and crown alike. You are walking back toward the great hall, not for judgment, not for feasting, but for that curious medieval cocktail of duty and diversion, evening entertainment. The court is already gathering. The hall has been transformed since supper. Tables cleared, benches pushed to the sides, and a carpet of fresh rushes laid down to cover whatever mysteries the last meal may have left behind. The air smells of wax, warmed mead, and anticipation. You take your place in a carved, high-backed chair. Not quite a throne, but clearly the only seat that matters. And survey the scene. Nobles lounge on cushions, minor lords perch on stools, and the musicians are tuning their instruments with the serious expressions of people preparing for battle. Tonight's offering includes a small harp ensemble, a jug band of enthusiastic if tonally ambitious peasants, and a jongleur who claims to juggle flaming knives and philosophical metaphors. You make a mental note to have a physician nearby. The queen arrives moments later, wearing her evening silks, and that look that says she may speak in riddles all night just to keep people guessing. She sits beside you and leans in. Let's count how many people try to flirt with the Countess of Velm. You nod. That game never gets old. The music begins, a soft, lilting melody from a stringed rebec, accompanied by a subtle drum beat tapped on stretched goat hide. It's surprisingly good. The tension in your shoulders loosens by a degree. You might even enjoy this, if no one brings out the chessboard. Of course, someone brings out the chessboard. Baron Frunard, always eager to prove himself intellectually robust, presents it like a holy relic. He bows. Shall we, Your Majesty? You sigh inwardly and gesture for the board to be set between you. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Chess was considered the noble game of kings. Tactical, symbolic, and suspiciously metaphorical. Each piece had meaning. Every move was watched. And, depending on who was present, losing could be seen as weakness. So, yes, no pressure. Baron Frunard makes his opening move with all the smugness of a man who has practiced this in front of a mirror. You respond without speaking. Pawns clash. Bishops glide. The crowd quiets. Halfway through, the jongleur starts his act, juggling knives and quoting Virgil, a risky combination. The queen laughs softly. You glance up just as a flaming dagger nearly takes out a candelabra. The jongleur recovers, bows deeply, and launches into a rhyme about honor, ambition, and soup. It's somehow all very pointed. Meanwhile, your rook takes Frunard's knight. He frowns. You sip your wine. Fringe tidbit, There's a persistent story, possibly apocryphal, of a medieval queen who used chess to vet suitors for her daughter. She'd observed their strategy, their temper, and their willingness to sacrifice a pawn. You like that idea. You've met many a knight who plays chess like he fights, loudly, badly, and with no exit plan. Frunard's queen threatens your king. You lean back, pretend to consider, then slide a bishop into position that turns the tide completely. A checkmate is 5 moves away. He doesn't see it. The music swells. Now a lively tune with clapping and foot tapping. Lady Ismena has taken to dancing by herself in the corner, her sleeves flaring like flags. The Countess of Velm has acquired 3 admirers and is managing them like a seasoned falconer, gentle, watchful, and occasionally nipping. Your queen leans in again. That bard, from earlier, I think he's composing something about your feet. You glance around. Sure enough, Edward is scribbling furiously while staring vaguely in your direction. You try not to look alarmed. Frunard makes a bold move. Incorrect, but bold. You counter it smoothly. Historians still argue whether chess at royal courts was just a game or a formal rehearsal for actual battle. Tonight, it feels like both. Every piece, every move, is a dance of power and personality. Frunard sweats. You smile. The courtiers whisper. Checkmate, the room exhales. Frunard bows, forced to grin through clenched teeth. A lesson well learned, Your Majesty. You nod magnanimously, like a king who totally didn't rehearse that bishop maneuver last week against a stable boy. The jongleur returns, this time balancing on one foot while telling a story about a talking pig that solved a crime. No one believes it. Everyone listens. You stretch, shift in your chair, and survey the hall. The entertainment continues. Dancing, riddles, even a short puppet skit that includes an oddly accurate parody of your steward. He pretends not to notice. He's definitely taking names. Then come the toasts. A young knight stands and salutes you with a goblet of mead. He calls you a lion among men, a just hand, and the evening star of our kingdom. It's a lot. You nod graciously and raise your cup. You've heard worse. The queen raises hers. 2 fewer poems and better pies. Everyone laughs. You drink. You feel the evening begin to slow. The fire crackles lower. The laughter softens. Servants drift through, quietly collecting goblets. A noble snores gently in the corner. You glance at the queen. She looks content, which means nothing is currently on fire. Entertainment winds down. A final melody plays. A soft, familiar lullaby your mother once hummed when you were a child trying to sleep in a different castle with equally cold walls. And as you rise to leave, the court parts like a curtain. Sleep well, sire, someone says. You nod. You'll try. But first, more prayers, and more robes, and probably more itching. You're heading now to the last phase of the evening, the winding down, winding up, curiously elaborate routine of royal nighttime. But don't get too relaxed yet. Before your head touches a pillow, there's still one more round of social acrobatics, evening games, and gentle threats disguised as leisure. You're back in a smaller solar chamber this time, away from the musicians and juggling philosophy. It's cozier here. A private hearth crackles low, cushions have been arranged on the floor, and a side table holds warmed spiced wine and a tray of something soft and vaguely sweet, possibly almond paste, possibly boiled gooseberries. You don't ask. Tonight's gathering is tighter. No more than a dozen faces. Friends, advisors, frenemies, and at least one cousin who shows up wherever food and gossip are available. You take a seat on the thickest cushion and loosen your belt slightly. A tiny rebellion. Then the chessboard appears again. You groan audibly this time. The queen smirks and waves it away. Not tonight, she says, reaching instead for a set of ivory dice in a velvet pouch. The sigh of collective relief is palpable. Dice it is, then. A game of luck. Bluffing and timing, perfect for nobles who want to look clever but are secretly exhausted. The rules shift, depending on who's playing, but no one minds. The point isn't to win. The point is to show you re-sharp enough to lose gracefully and generous enough to make others feel important while you do it. First roll, you get a pair of threes. Not impressive, but not shameful. Across from you, your cousin Gaspar rolls a 6 and a 1 and declares it the number of years he'll outlive the rest of you. A bold claim from a man who once fell asleep mid-toast. You pass the goblet around. Wine warms your throat, loosens your tongue. The jokes flow now, some clever, some scandalous, all carefully veiled behind plausible deniability. Someone tells a story about a knight who mistook a bishop's chamber pot for holy water. You laugh so hard you nearly drop your dice. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Games like dice, backgammon, and chess were hugely popular at medieval courts. They served as entertainment, yes, but also as tools for alliance, manipulation, and occasionally settling minor disputes. There's even a tale of a duke gambling away a tower. You've never risked that much, but you once wagered a goat. You lost. You still hear about it. Then someone suggests a game of questions. It's a dangerous one. Players take turns asking each other pointed questions. Truths wrapped in jokes. Insults wrapped in riddles. The first question is mild. If you weren't king, what would you be? You smile. A baker. Quiet hours. Predictable flour. No border skirmishes. Everyone laughs. You kind of mean it. The queen's turn. She's asked who she'd banish from court for a month. She sips her wine and answers, the next person who commissions a tapestry of their own face. One of the nobles goes very still. You all pretend not to notice. Next question lands on the bishop. Which sin is your favorite? He blinks. Then deadpan. Sloth. But I'm too lazy to indulge it. You raise your cup in respect. And now, the court jester. Just arrived, late as always, but with that glint in his eye. He tosses a carved wooden cube in the air and announces, let's play truth or forfeit. You raise an eyebrow. The room leans in. First victim, Lord Avenel. He's asked whether he's in debt. He hesitates, then declares, only emotionally. He earns a mild applause and escapes the forfeit. Second victim, the steward. Question, how many coins from the royal treasury have you relocated this year? The steward gulps and takes the forfeit, reciting a love poem to your boot. He does it. It's not bad. Your turn. The jester grins. Your Majesty, if you could trade one noble for one pig, name both. There's a collective intake of breath. You take a long sip of wine, lean forward, and smile. I'd name the pig after the noble. Save time. The laughter is so loud, the guards outside probably flinch. The noble in question, probably Lord Frunard, let's be honest, forces a chuckle. Politics is survival. And you've just reminded the room who still wears the crown. Here comes your fringe tidbit. Some medieval kings used evening games not only to bond with their courtiers, but to subtly test loyalty, temperament, and flexibility. A noble who can laugh at himself can be trusted more than one who sulks through a sonnet. The games wind down, dice are put away, goblets are drained, stories shift from funny to fond, tales of winters past, battles won, loves lost, cloaks stolen, songs forgotten. The queen rests her head briefly on your shoulder, murmuring something about needing warmer slippers. You promise nothing, but tomorrow, someone's getting a sheepskin delivery assignment. One final song is hummed, soft, slow, almost a lullaby. The fire crackles low, shadows lengthen, the mood softens. You rise finally, offering a nod that signals the evening's end. The courtiers bow or curtsy, murmuring thanks and gentle wishes. You're exhausted, slightly tipsy, and still vaguely itchy. But you've laughed, played, dominated one game, lost two, earned a poem about your boots, and regained command of a falcon. Not a bad evening for a king with taxes, threats, and flaming daggers still floating in his wake. You walk slowly back to your chamber, guards falling in behind you, footsteps echoing through stone and silence. The robes come off next, and then prayers. Again, you return to your chamber and find the torches dimmed, the fire reduced to embers, and the flickering glow dancing across your bed, carved posts like it, trying to put on a show just for you. It doesn't help. You're tired, not just physically, but in that slow, creeping way that settles into your bones. The kind of tired that even kings don't escape. Your attendants are already waiting, standing dutifully near the foot of the bed with fresh linens, a soft robe, and the expression of people who've seen one too many royal ankles. They bow as you enter, and the ritual begins. Step 1. Remove the outer robe, still faintly smoky from the evening hearth. And let's be honest, speckled with crumbs from that unfortunate almond tart incident. A page takes it reverently, as if it's the Shroud of Turin. You say nothing. Step 2. The ceremonial hand washing. A silver ewer, a shallow basin, and a cloth that's only mildly damp. This isn't about cleanliness anymore. It's symbolic, like rinsing the day off before sleep. You let the water run over your hands, thinking not about sin or salvation, but about whether that pigeon you saw on the turret today was limping or just dramatic. Step 3. Night robes. Lighter, softer, blessedly less itchy. Linen, well worn, and faintly scented with lavender. It's as close to comfort as you're likely to get. Your slippers are exchanged for bare feet, and even the floor feels tired beneath you. Now comes the clergy. Yes, again. Your chaplain enters, bowing slightly, carrying his ever-present prayer book and wearing a look that suggests he's also memorized your snore cadence. He begins the compline prayers in Latin, voice low and rhythm steady, while you stand at the foot of the bed and try not to sway from exhaustion. You murmur the responses as required, though by this hour your accent has slipped and you may have just blessed a goose. The chaplain continues unbothered. He's heard worse. Last week you accidentally called yourself a vegetable. Here is your mainstream historical fact. Medieval kings often ended their day with a set of formal prayers, either alone or with a personal cleric. It wasn't just piety. It was part public image, part superstition, and part insurance against nightmares. Tonight, you do the shorter version. After the final Amen, the chaplain bows and exits. You exhale and sit on the edge of the bed. The sheets are freshly laid, warmed by a brass pan filled with coals. It's a pleasant luxury, one that doesn't always work. The last time they left it in too long, your mattress caught a little more fire of the Holy Spirit than intended. Your bed itself is large, canopied, and surrounded by thick curtains. Not for privacy. Again, that's a myth. But for warmth. Those curtains block drafts. Yes, but they also trap the body heat of a king, a mattress stuffed with straw, and, tonight, 2 guards sleeping just outside, pretending not to hear your dreams. Fringe tidbit of the evening. There are records of kings sharing chambers not only with guards, but also scribes, pages, dogs, and even their favorite falcons. You've only got the guards tonight. Harold the Falcon is presumably sleeping off his mid-afternoon escape. The Queen hasn't returned yet. She often stays in her own apartments for privacy or peace, especially when court politics have been extra noisy. You don't take it personally. In fact, you occasionally envy her. A night without parchment. Bliss. You slip under the covers, adjusting the woolen blankets and fur throws that make you feel both royal and buried alive. A servant tucks the curtains slightly tighter than necessary. You emerge just enough to breathe. And now, of course, you think, because sleep doesn't come right away. Not for you. Not with that crown-shaped shadow that never really leaves your pillow. You think about tomorrow's council, about that letter from the Duke of Halmira, about whether the grain from the southern farms will arrive before the river floods again, about whether the Countess of Velm really was flirting with the ambassador or just playing her usual long game of make everyone uncomfortable, then vanish. You scratch your shoulder. The itch is back. Of course it is. You shift, fluff the straw pillow. It wheezes like an old monk. Somewhere nearby, a mouse scurries. One of the guards coughs. The castle breathes around you. Groaning wood, settling stone, the occasional rustle of a tapestry in the draft. Historians still argue whether medieval kings ever truly slept peacefully. How could they? Every corner of the kingdom pulls on you like thread. One phrase, the whole thing unravels. That's what the crown is. A responsibility so heavy, you wear it even after you take it off. You close your eyes. Try to forget. Try to dream. But before you drift off, there's one final step. You murmur the same quiet phrase your father once told you to say each night. A tiny prayer, not in Latin, but in the language of children and kings alike. Let the kingdom be quiet, just for tonight. Then you exhale and wait for sleep to find you. The castle is nearly silent now. That deep, velvety stillness that only settles after the last goblet has been drained. The last torch has been extinguished, and the nobles are too full or too drunk to cause any more trouble. But kings don't get real silence. You're awake again. Not fully, but enough. Somewhere in the black velvet of night, you stirred. No dream startled you. No sound pulled you back. Just the familiar weight. A prickling on the edge of awareness. The sensation of being watched by your own mind. You lie there, staring up at the heavy bed canopy. Its embroidered lions and dragons just faint shapes in the dark. The fire's down to glowing coals now, casting flickers through the crack in your curtain. The fur blanket has slipped to one side. Your left foot is cold. Naturally, you shift, and that's when the whispering starts. No, not ghostly, real. Outside your chamber, two guards murmuring low, too low to understand the words, but enough to make you listen. You know that tone. Someone forgot to oil the hinges, or someone saw a shadow, or someone just can't sleep and is filling the time with gossip about how long the queen took to finish her wine tonight. You pull the blanket tighter and close your eyes again, but now you're alert. This is the hour of royal anxiety. It always is. The castle at night is a creature of its own, breathing through vents and keyholes, creaking under its own ancient weight. It talks in groans and clicks, and you've learned to read them all like omens. There's a sound behind the wall. A rat, most likely, or a servant using the hidden passageways you're absolutely not supposed to know about. You discovered those as a child and never told anyone. Still haven't. One day you might need them. Hopefully not tonight. You roll onto your side, then your back. The straw-stuffed mattress crunches. You scratch your chest, then your calf. The royal itch has migrated. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Castles didn't sleep well. Stone amplified every sound. Tapestries muffled only so much. And kings, despite all their power, were often surrounded by people, and yet profoundly alone. Night didn't respect crowns. You sit up a little, squinting toward the fire. A log collapses, sending sparks up like startled fireflies. You think about getting up, walking, but the cold makes you reconsider. You're royalty, not suicidal. And then, there it is. The thought, the one that always finds you this time of night. What if something is coming? Not an enemy army, not yet, but a slow rot, a famine, a betrayal, a shift of loyalty that begins with one careless joke and ends with a throne on fire. Historians still argue whether kings were paranoid or merely perceptive. The truth is probably both. You can't rule a kingdom without seeing danger in everything, even shadows. Especially shadows. You throw the covers back, quietly, slip out of bed. The stone floor is cold enough to remind you you're alive. You walk to the window. Outside, the moon hangs low over the courtyard, pale and distant, like a watchful god with no strong opinions. The trees sway gently. A torch flickers by the main gate. One of the night guards paces. The castle sleeps. You watch for a while, not because you expect anything to happen, but because sometimes the watching is the only thing you can do. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval kings had their personal guards rotate every hour through the night, not for protection, but so that the king could be assured nothing was too routine. Predictability breeds opportunity, especially for poisoners. You're not expecting poison tonight, but then again, no one ever does. You return to bed, now more chilled than when you left it. The blankets resist slightly. You wrangle them into place, flop onto your side, and exhale sharply. Still not asleep. You try counting something. Anything. Not sheep. Too cliché. You count towers instead. 1, 2, 3, 5, if you include the ruined one by the stables. You still haven't repaired it. Some say it's cursed. Others say it's just ugly. Then, strangely, you think of your father and how he used to hum under his breath when he was nervous, and how he used to say, "A king who can't sleep is a king who hears too much." He was right. You hear everything. The drip of melting snow in the gutter, the flap of a loose shutter on the upper floor, the sigh of one of your guards shifting weight, the scratch of something. A quill? Or maybe a mouse in your chamber, daring to trespass on divine authority. You hope it's the mouse. You can't afford another scribe drafting odes this hour. You start to drift. Maybe. Finally, your limbs feel heavy, warm again. The weight of the covers, less like a cage, more like a shield. You hear the fire settle into its final stage of glowing quiet, and just before sleep finally takes you, you think, if anyone tries anything tonight, I hope they trip on my boots. And with that, you go under, into dreams. Hopefully, the world returns slowly, gently. You surface from sleep like a boat rising out of fog, not all at once, but in parts. First breath, then body, then the awareness of morning creeping in through the cracks. But not just yet. You keep your eyes closed, clinging to the warmth of the bed, the dull ache of your shoulders, the distant echo of whatever dream was just chased off by a rooster crowing 3 courtyards away. You wonder briefly if you were dreaming at all, or just rehearsing anxieties in velvet costumes. Outside your bed curtains, the castle stirs again. Someone is moving, quietly, professionally, likely a servant laying fresh rushes, or maybe the chamberlain trying not to breathe too loudly while checking if you're awake. You are, but you don't admit it. Not yet, because you know what's coming. The same morning routine, the same frigid basin, the same parade of robes, advisors, nobles, scribes, complaints, celebrations, wine, mild itching, and public displays of barely contained exasperation. It's always the same. You're a king, and your kingdom is never asleep for long. Eventually, you stretch, slowly. An old joint clicks, the bed creaks, the silence beyond the curtain stills. Someone has noticed. You swing your feet over the side of the bed and wince as they meet the cold floor again. Why is it always cold? The curtain parts. A servant bows. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. The day begins again. You mutter something resembling morning, though it could just as easily be an ancient curse. It's too early to commit. The same robe is held up. The same goblet of diluted wine is presented. Somewhere outside, the chapel bell tolls. Once, twice, a third time, like a countdown to a life already decided. But you smile, faintly, despite it all, because something about the repetition, the rhythm of the court, the demands of the day, they give structure, a shape to your life. Without them, you'd just be another noble with an opinion and too many dogs. This is the grindstone that polishes your crown. You rise, you allow the robe, you rinse your face, you kiss the cross. You are king, and even if it's the same tomorrow, and the day after, and every day beyond, it still matters. Even the smallest gestures ripple outward. A sentence today becomes a legend tomorrow. A nod at breakfast changes an entire family's future. You glance toward the narrow window. Light seeps in, soft and gray, filtered through morning mist. Somewhere, a messenger is saddling a horse. A baron is waking with a headache. A scribe is nervously correcting a misspelled royal title. You'll see them all soon. For now, the chamber smells of wax and wet wool. The fire has been rebuilt, and your slippers, blessedly, have been warmed. So you take a breath, stretch once more, and step back into the never-ending performance, because this is your routine, your reign, your daily battle with quills, coughs, gossip, and gravity. And in the quiet moments between complaints, you remember why you do it. Because the kingdom, for all its mess, is yours. And as long as you wake up, step into the robe, and sit on the throne, this world spins the way it should. The The castle quiets again, as all things do. The hearths burn low. The great hall stands empty, save for a few echoing footsteps and the last shadows of the evening stretched across the stone. The crown, now resting on its velvet pillow, is no less powerful for being set aside. And you, dear listener, are far from the cold floors and courtly games of this old stone palace. The weight of the day lifts with every breath, your thoughts softening like candle wax in the warmth of calm. Let the laughter from the feast echo faintly and fade. Let the tap of boots in the corridor become part of the hush. The flicker of firelight dims. The scrolls are rolled and tied. The sword sleeps in its sheath. Even the falcon has tucked its head beneath one wing. You did enough today. Whatever troubles wait beyond this moment, they are not for now. Let the walls of this imagined castle hold them. Let your breath steady, your shoulders release, your jaw uncoil from the hours it spent braced for interruption. The stars are high above, cold and far, but constant. The night is long and quiet, just as it should be, and you, perhaps for the first time all day, are still. So close your eyes now. Rest. Let the worries slip off your shoulders, like the king's robe at twilight. There's nothing left to do. The world will wait. Sleep well.